Good day everyone, I'm Aizal T. Madera and I'm going to discuss about elements of fiction. But first, let us define fiction. Fiction, from the Latin word fictio, meaning the act of making, fashioning, or molding. Fiction is a literature created from the imagination, not presented as fact, though it may be based on a true story or situation. It may be writer's lived experience or it may be entirely imagined. In element of fiction, we have character. Character, it is a person, an animal, or an imaginary creature in a story. Types of character. Major characters. These are the most important characters in the story. There are two types of major characters. The first one is the protagonist. The protagonist is the main character of the story that is most central to the action of the story. And these are the central figure with whom we usually sympathize or identify. Second is the antagonist. These are the person or team working against the protagonist in the story, or the figure who opposes the protagonist and creates the conflict. Minor characters. These are the other characters in the story. They are not as important as the major characters but still play a large part in the story. Their action helps drive the story forward. They may impact the decision that the protagonist or antagonist make, either helping or interfering with the conflict. Under minor characters are foil character. Foil character has the opposite personality traits from main characters and usually made to shine the protagonist. Many times, the antagonist is the foil for the protagonist. Next is static. These characters who are static do not change throughout the story. Their use may simply to create or relieve tension, or they were not meant to change. A major character can remain static through the whole story. Dynamic. Dynamic characters change throughout the story. They may learn a lesson, become a bad, or change in a complex ways. Next is a flat character. A flat character has one or two main traits, usually only all positive or negative. They are the opposite of a round character. The flaw and strength has its use in the story. Next is round characters. These are the opposite of the flat character. These characters have many different traits such as good and bad, making them more interesting. And lastly, the stock characters. These are the stereotypical characters such as the boy genius, ambitious career person, faithful sidekick, mad scientist, and etc. Characterization. This refers to the method used by the writer to create his or her characters. Characters are revealed to us by the means of the following techniques: what the narrator says about the character, what the other character says about the character, what the character says about him or herself, and what the character actually does. Setting is where and when the story takes place. Types of setting. Have you ever read a story but found out it difficult to figure out what time period in which the story was written or where it is? The story probably had a backdrop setting. A backdrop setting is when the setting is unimportant for the story and the story could take place in any setting. The focus on the lesson or message is being delivered. This type of setting is often found in folktales and fairy tales and simply set the stage and the mood. An example of this is Winnie the Pooh, in which a story could happen in any setting, since the lesson that the characters learn is the point rather than the time period. Integral setting. This type of setting is when the time and place are important to the story. The action, character, or theme are influenced by the time and place. The setting is fully described in both time and place and usually found in a historical fiction. Plot. Plot is the order of events in the story. The plot of a story is a series of interconnected events in which every occurrence has a specific purpose. The plot usually follows a particular structure called Freytag's pyramid. Gustav Freytag, a German playwright who lived during the 1800s, identified this structure. Plots are typically made up of 5 elements. The first one is exposition. At the beginning of the story, characters, setting, and the main conflict are typically introduced. Second is rising action. In rising action, the main character is in crisis and events leading up to facing the conflict begin to unfold. In here, the story becomes complicated. Third is climax. This is the turning point in the story. Usually, it is a single event with the greatest intensity and uncertainty. The main character must contend with the problem at this point. Fourth is falling action. The story begins to slow down and work toward its end, tying up loose ends. And lastly is the resolution, or also known as denouement. It's like a concluding paragraph that resolves any remaining issues and ends the story. Conflict, a struggle between two opposing forces. Types of conflict. Character versus self. This type of conflict is pretty much self-explanatory, with one person struggling for victory over another. A character experiencing conflict within his or her own mind. Character versus character. This conflict will most often play out between a protagonist and his or her antagonist, although it can also appear between friends or acquaintances as well. Next is character versus nature. A character is set in opposition to nature. This can mean the weather, the wilderness, or a natural disaster. Character versus supernatural. A conflict that occurs when the protagonist finds him or herself pitted against a vengeful god or powerful supernature force. Character versus technology. This is when a protagonist is facing machines or technology such as mechanical failure or robots and must prevail against it. Character versus society. The protagonist is placed in opposition with society, the government, or a cultural tradition or societal norm of some kind. Characters may be motivated to take action against their society by a need to survive, a moral sense of right and wrong, or a desire for happiness, freedom, justice, or love. Point of view. Point of view is the angle of perspective from which the story is told. The author chooses who is to tell the story by determining the point of view. Depending on who the narrator is, he or she will be standing at one point and seeing the action. This viewpoint will give the narrator a partial or a whole view of events as they happen. Types of point of view. First is the first-person point of view. The story is told from the viewpoint of one of the character, using the first-person pronoun I, meaning that we are seeing events through the eyes of the character telling the story. Second is second-person point of view. This point of view belongs to the person being addressed. The narrator is speaking to you. This isn't very common in fiction unless the narrator is trying to talk to the reader personally. We see second-person point of view mostly in poems, speeches, instructional writings, and persuasive articles. And lastly is the third-person point of view. The narrator is describing what's seen, but as a spectator. Under the third-person point of view, we have limited. In limited third person, the narrator sees only what's in front of him or her. A spectator of events as they unfold and unable to read any other character's mind. Second is the omniscient. An omniscient narrator sees all. He or she sees what each character is doing and can see it into each other's character mind. This is common with an external character who is standing above or watching the action below. We also have limited omniscient, wherein the limited omniscient third person can only see into one's character mind. He or she might see other events happening but only knows the reason of one's character's action in the story. Theme is a central idea or the meaning of the story. A theme is not the plot of the story. It is the underlying truth that is being conveyed in the story, directly or indirectly. Themes can be universal, meaning they are understood by readers no matter what culture or country that the readers are in. Common themes including coming of age, circle of life, greed, God versus evil, beating the odds, and etc. Style is the way in which an author writes and tells a story. It's what sets one author apart from another and creates the voice that audience hear when they read. Style is also what determines the mood of a piece of a literature, so its importance is huge across all genres. These poems use two different styles to describe the same theme, which is a rose. The poem on the left rhymes and has a simpler, more direct style with easy vocabulary. The poem on the right side, however, is more descriptive and expressive, or let me say more poetic. And that because of tone and word choice. This first poem describes the rose in basic way, while the second one seems to express the author's understanding of a rose. For instance, the author chose more specific color like emerald, scarlet instead of green and red, and described the rose by relating it to other things like smooth velvet. The style of the first poem will be great for young readers, while the styles of the second definitely targeting an adult audience. That's because, as you can see, some of language of the second poem will be difficult for young readers to understand. Parts of style. Here are some key parts that work together to make up a piece of literature style. Diction, the style of the author word choice. Sentence structure, the way words are arranged in a sentence. Tone, the mood of the story, the feeling or attitude a word creates. Narrator, the person telling the story and the point of view it is told in. Grammar and the use of punctuation. Creative devices like symbolism, allegory, metaphor, rhyme, and so on.